Welcome to the Spirit Sisters podcast, where we gather around the virtual hearth to share our life journeys and the spiritual encounters that shape us. I'm Karina Machado, and it's my life's passion to share these stories that remind us that we are more than our bodies. Right now, especially, I feel these sacred stories of ours are medicine for our times. Speaking of medicine for our times, my guest today is Dr. Adam Rizvi, a critical care physician whose personal journey with grief opened the door to experiences his scientific training couldn't explain. Adam shares many of these moments at the bedside of patients in his beautiful book, Love Does Not Know Death. He recounts some of these astounding moments in our conversation, which I hope you'll love. It felt very aligned for me to connect with Adam, and I hope you'll feel that. He's come to see death as an initiation, that's his word, that can open us to love, to forgiveness, to eternal connection, and much more. Some of the highlights of our conversation include the transformative power of afterlife encounters, what it means to truly face death, and about how love doesn't end when someone dies. At the end of our chat, he shared insights about how love continues and communication continues that I just found extraordinarily beautiful and supportive. If you're listening while missing someone you love, you're especially in my heart, and I hope that there's something here that is really nourishing for you. This is for you. Enjoy my interview with Dr. Adam Rizvi. Hi Adam, welcome to Spirit Sisters.
Hey Karina, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm overjoyed, and just before pressing record, I was talking a little bit about how excited I am to welcome you onto the show today. I feel that everything that you're going to share with us in the conversation today is just going to light up our audience's lives, and I know that for so many of the audience who are going through a grief journey or perhaps have loved ones that have been in the intensive care unit or might be experiencing that now, this is just going to come as such a profound conversation for them.
I hope so. Yeah, I there's so many things that happen as we face death and have the courage to face death. And sometimes it's painful, it's filled with grief and sorrow, and sometimes it's filled with tons of breakthroughs, huge breakthroughs, personal breakthroughs in ability to forgive ourselves for the things we've done in the past, forgive others for grievances we haven't let go. I feel like death is one of those things where if you really have the courage to face it, it's a massive opportunity.
Thank you. Yes, and that's such a theme that really shines through every page of your beautiful book, which is called Love Knows No Death. Did I say that
Love does
correctly?
not know death.
Thank you. As I was saying it, I thought that's not right, Karina. And I've been reading it and loving it. So before we go into your beautiful book, I'd just love to start with you, please, Adam. So tell us, who were you before love and loss cracked open your life and your journey?
That's a really good way of putting it. Yes, it does crack us open, doesn't it? Who was I? Who was I? Well, um, I was a product of two different cultures. My father was raised Muslim, my mother was raised Catholic. And so I recall when we were younger, my parents wanted to expose my sister and I to both traditions. So every summer break, which is about 3 months during school, we would, or after school, I should say, we would go to either Pakistan or France, and every year it would alternate. And interestingly, I found myself when I was in Pakistan, I would go to the mosque every Friday prayers. I learned how to read the Quran in Arabic. I learned how to pray 5 times a day. Um, there's such a beauty to that religion, to Islam. The the message for me was think about God at least 5 times a day, right? And really every day, every hour, every second. That's sort of the guidance. It's reminding you. So I got that message from a really young age, and the devotion I felt towards God and to all the saints within that tradition, I felt it in my heart. And then, the next summer I would be in France and I would go to church and I would go to the cathedrals. I'd go to Montmartre and Notre Dame and all of these beautiful cathedrals, in addition to the small chapels in the town that my grandparents lived in. And I would look at the stages of the cross. I would look at this iconography of the saints, and I felt the same devotion, the same love in my heart would come out. And I found that so fascinating because it told me that there's a truth underneath it all that does not care what shape or form it takes, and that there's a love for that truth that doesn't care what the container is. And yes, my drive eventually was to study comparative religion and to find the core truth underneath all religions. I ended up exploring Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism and all the isms, to find that core truth, and it sort of led me to where I am now on my path, um, and exploring the non-dual traditions of the world. But what I found fascinating was the core message, albeit cliche, really is love. It's love. And when you say love, it it can sound trite and cliche, but when you feel it, especially when you've lost someone or you're losing someone, especially when you have a family member you've never spoken to for years, and then your parent is about to die, and you come together and you have to face old hurts and grievances, and you finally let it all go, and there's a healing. And then when the love that comes from that, there's no word to describe it. That's the love that I'm talking about. It's like it's a deep, visceral love that leaves you transformed. That's the love that's in the core of the world's wisdom traditions.
Thank you for that. That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. And parallel to this path of yours that was deeply immersed in the spiritual inquiry is the path of allopathic medicine, which you study. And I was wondering, how did that journey, like do those two paths intersect for you? And I know you come from a family of doctors. Is that right, Adam?
Yeah, yeah. Well, everyone except for my father. My father was a good old-fashioned businessman, but he ran restaurants in the restaurant business. My mother is a physician, my sister is a physician, and my wife is a physician. So in that sense, we're all doctors.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you? So, I mean, this is, I
Yes.
guess, the core of your story in many ways, and what you share in your book. Just that intersection of your
Mm,
spiritual life, which is very profound and has, as you just shared a little bit of it, it's come with you from childhood, and then you've moved into this healing of the body more so than the spirit, but you've come to witness in your role as a physician, this healing that you just touched on, the forgiveness of, say, a parent that, where there's been this estrangement. How has that landed for you, I guess now in retrospect, looking back on those two paths intersecting?
yeah. That's a really good. First, let me just say, my father has, as you probably read in the book, has since passed away, but I just want to thank him again. I would not be where I am if it weren't for him. When I finished college, I wanted to continue studying religion and be a religion professor. And it's still a huge interest of mine, as you can probably tell. But he really wanted me to be a doctor, and he knew I had interest in the sciences and I was good at it. But sort of to spite him, I said, no, I'm gonna be a barista. So I ended up taking a job at Starbucks, and I was a barista for about a year until I caved in and realized, no, I actually do have interest in the sciences, and so I applied to med school and I got there. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you, Dad, for guiding me to be a healer. And really, that's it's interesting. I went into medicine with already a pretty deep spiritual practice. I was already meditating daily. I already had some sense of the non-dual traditions. I was reading Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj. I was reading various Advaita Vedanta texts. For those of you who are familiar with those traditions, Buddhist texts, I really wanted to experience truth. It's one thing to intellectually understand it. And that's largely what college was for me, to intellectually understand the core of the mystical traditions of the world, from Christian mysticism to the mysticism of Buddhism and beyond. But I wanted to feel it and I wanted to know it. So I was deeply practicing and meditating regularly. And so when I went into medicine, I sort of told myself, okay, I'm going into the belly of the beast. And and I don't say that to disparage Western medicine, because honestly, Western medicine is a beautiful practice. And if I got in a car accident and fractured my femur or my humerus, I would go to the ER and I'd get that surgery and repair it. Like we are, I say we, but allopathic physicians are good at what they do, most of them at least. And so I respect the tradition. Where it has been challenging for me is the broader worldview that allopathic medicine lives inside of. Allopathic medicine, at least up until now, views the body largely as a complex biochemical machine. And it views consciousness as a byproduct of that machine. The neurons that fire together, they somehow fire in such a complex way that consciousness arises sort of like as an epiphenomenon. So in that model, the body is first, consciousness is secondary. But it's funny because I went into medicine believing the reverse, which is that consciousness and I like the word awareness because I think it's a speaks to a deeper level of reality. But awareness is first, and the body is secondary. But the body, at least according to many non-dual traditions, is a projection of the mind. The body exists inside the mind and not the other way around. But that, just for the record, I'm taking off my doctor's hat. That is not what most Western medicine believes. But even though I may not exist inside the same mental framework as some of my Western medicine colleagues, the way we practice as loving healthcare providers that genuinely care about our patients, that's the same. And that I think that's part of the call to my fellow healthcare providers in my book, Love Does Not Know Death, is that you, even if you have a patient who's dying, you can make a difference. You can make a difference by simply being present with your patient and with their family members lovingly. And it doesn't mean that you have to talk very much. Sometimes I mention this in the book, but I find that some of the greatest moments of healing occurred in total silence. Total silence. Just sitting with a family member who's crying because they know their loved one's about to die. I don't have to say anything. We don't have to say anything. Just letting the tears flow. But from my heart, there's a feeling of absolute total acceptance and allowing of whatever is to be. And I see a lot of healing happen in those moments.
Mm. Listening to you, I'm thinking what a beautiful gift you must be to your patients in those moments, and how you are most likely a rare kind of doctor, but hopefully, there might be a turning of the tides and we might hopefully see more doctors like you. Now, Adam, you mentioned your father before, and your book in many ways is, I guess, rooted in this profound story of personal loss. I was wondering if you could share it, even just a briefer version of it for our listeners, and then the role that the passing of your father played in the genesis of your book.
Wow, thank you. I've done a handful of interviews. I think you're the first one that's asked me that, to go into that, because it's why my book came to be what it is. Thank you, Karina.
Pleasure.
Um, well, I'll share the brief story. I first of all, I want to acknowledge we all, most of us, at least midway through our lives, have lost a lot of people. So I'm not claiming that this loss of my father is any different from some of the tragic losses that all of your listeners may have had. It's one among many. My father had a lot of heart disease, and somehow he seemed to sense that his time was coming. It is quite interesting how, in retrospect, it looked like he knew on an unconscious level because he had never filled out any of his advanced wishes or his healthcare directives for years after of me telling him, you need to do this, you need to do this. And then literally the day before he decides to go on a pilgrimage trip to the Middle East, he says, here, let me fill this all out. He filled out all the advance directives. He designated me as executor of his will and estate, and he forwarded that all to me. I find that very interesting that he just suddenly felt like he needed to do that. And so he flew, he did the pilgrimage, and was on his way back to America when, with my mother, when he had a heart attack on the plane. And the plane actually was supposed to land back in Washington, D.C., but instead got diverted and landed in Istanbul, Turkey, which must have been interesting for the other passengers involved. But he got there. My mom, she said it was probably one of the most traumatic experiences of her life. But to have him be met by the paramedics, the Turkish paramedics, to be taken into the ambulance to go to the hospital. And then as soon as he arrived in the hospital, he coded, which is to say his heart stopped. They did CPR and chest compressions. They got him back. And for the next 4 to 5 days, he was in the ICU in Turkey. My sister and I found out when my mom called us in the middle of the night. And so we bought tickets immediately. We flew over and we got to see him a day before he ended up getting intubated, meaning put on life support. And we had a very honestly painful but loving conversation with him where we told him we loved him, and we were able to connect. There was so much more we wanted to say, obviously, but he was tired, and I think just looking at him in his eyes and letting him know that we love him, and him letting us know that he loved us, that's all we needed. The day later, he got intubated, and then one day after that, he ended up passing away. When we heard that he passed away, my mom, my sister, and I, we all got into a group hug, and even though we were hurting so bad, we all visualized his soul as a light. And with our hearts, we said, you're free to go. You're free to go. There's not a single shred of us that's holding you back. And I think that's important because part of unconditional love is this sense of allowing freedom for the other. It may not be what you want. You may want to hold on to them. You may not want them to go, but unfiltered love, unconditional love is the allowing, is the spacious allowing, the courageous allowing of your loved one to go, to be wherever they need to be. And I truly felt like my father felt that, and I could sense this lifting up, if you will, of his energy. And then that later, a few hours later, we drove to the hospital, and they took us to his body. And I remember looking at him, and it's really quite fascinating. And I don't say this in a morbid way, but when you look at a body that's dead, you really can feel that there's no one there. It's so striking. And I've been at the bedside of over 500 patients who have died. You can sense it. You really can. Now, I don't know if this is the soul leaving. I don't know if there's an energy component to this. I don't know the details. It's not my expertise, but my experience is that there's a visceral sense that one has when the life force, the consciousness of a being leaves the body. It's felt. It's felt. And sometimes, interestingly, and this goes to some of the stories I've shared in my book, is that I can feel that the leaving of the life force, even though the patient's heart rate is still going, they're still on a life support machine and their chest is still expanding with the air that we're pumping. I can feel when the life force leaves. And nurses who are often way more sensitive than I am will say, I don't think they're here anymore. And I find that interesting. I hope one of these days in the future, medicine will, one, be open to a broader worldview that takes into consideration consciousness, not as an epiphenomenon, but as something more the ground of reality, but also can recognize what is happening on an energetic level when someone actually passes away.
Thank you, Adam. You've preempted a point that I want to explore more with you further around the evolution of medicine. But just before we go into some of the stories about after-death communication that you've experienced and you document in your book, I was wondering, well, what I want to do is I want to read a quote from your book. And it's one of many. You've written a very quotable book. I've got a whole page of them, and I'm only 65% through the book. But this quote says, "Death isn't an end; it is a continuation. The fear we carry around about our own death is based on a misunderstanding so profound it colours all aspects of life. And facing that fear is actually the key to experiencing true life." So I asked you before about the role of your father's death in the genesis of your book, and maybe if you could touch on it with reference perhaps to this beautiful quote, and then we'll go into some of the beautiful experiences that you share.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's a good way for me to pick up on the story. After my father passed away, we needed to um, get his body approved to be carried back to America, um, sort of in the belly of the plane in the cargo section, and the U.S. Embassy in Turkey handled that. And then we needed to buy some equipment for our travels back. We went to a very large mall. This is like a typical multi-story mall with a huge open space in between, to get some of the materials that we need after stopping by the embassy. And I had this really profound experience. I was looking out over this vast open space, and I could see hundreds of people in this very large mall. I saw a woman with a stroller and her kid tossing over the toy onto the floor. I saw an old couple, a man with a walker, a young couple who are clearly dating, holding hands, walking down, just the whole gamut of life, all walking around me. And then it dawned on me, because my father's death was fresh in my mind. I thought every single one of them either has already or will lose a parent, a spouse, a child. At least one major loss occurs in each of our lives, and theoretically two, because you have two parents, but you also have spouses. So if for every one human being, there are a handful of major deaths that occur. And I was heavy with the the sorrow of my father's death, that it sort of dawned on me, oh my gosh, the amount of grief humanity faces on a daily basis is overwhelming. And what happened to me immediately in that moment was my heart just exploded open, and I had this immense compassion. And I said, how can I possibly judge anyone anymore, knowing how much suffering exists? So I just started melting from compassion. And Buddhists talk a lot about compassion and to cultivate it. I didn't need to cultivate anything. I was just exploding with compassion because I realized how much suffering there is in the world. And what it did for me, and I was very grateful to it, it sort of transformed the sticky morass of sorrow. It transformed it into a fire. And the fire was, I'm going to help people as much as I can, as much as I can. My life henceforth will be to serve fully, completely, always. And not just in what I do, but every thought that I have, as much as I can control it, will be a loving thought and a thought that is helpful. Every feeling I have is going to be a feeling that is helpful. If I'm feeling down, I will work immediately on transforming, not bypassing my emotions, truly feeling it and healing it on a deep, profound level. Because I know and we can talk about this, but I know on a level that I may not be conscious about, we are one. There's only one of us here. There's only one mind, one consciousness. So if I, Adam, am doing the work to heal this pain that arises, the regret, the resentment, the anger, the betrayal, all these emotions that arise from a day-to-day basis, if I can do that work, I know it's going to have a ripple effect on the one mind that exists that appears to be many. That was a big turning point for me because it transformed what my life was about. And I'm so grateful to my father for lighting that fire for me.
And at what point were you in your medicine journey when you had that experience? Were you already practicing?
I was in Arizona. Actually, I had just started my first real job. I finished training. The training is so long, but I trained to be a neurointensivist, which means I got training in neurology, and then I got additional training in critical care medicine, which means ICU. And that allows me to take care of patients who are critically ill due to neurological diseases like a large brain bleed or a gunshot wound to the brain or a spinal infection, those sort of major life-threatening neurological conditions. And I think it was the first year of me being a full-fledged practicing attending, which is the term we use in America for being a physician that's out of training. Um, and then this happened, and it was great too because it I went back to the hospital after that. Every single conversation I had with a loved one in the ICU who was dealing with their family member in a critical condition, I absolutely felt deep compassion for because I had just been on the receiving side of bad news in this hospital in Turkey. So
Mm.
I spent time with families, and I still do that. I think it changes how you practice medicine when you're on the other side.
Definitely, definitely. And it strikes me as you share that, well, A, yeah, there are no accidents, it came at such a key point in your journey as a physician in the physical realm, as a healer in this physical realm, like you were just starting. So I would assume it colored, and as you just shared, it kind of colored everything about how you dealt with the patients and continue to deal with them. And also, it strikes me that your father, you mentioned, played a key role in encouraging you to study medicine, but he's also given you this great gift of the experience of compassion that you can then bring to your patients. Like it's an extraordinary gift that he's also given you there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I realize I didn't directly address you sharing the quote, but um, probably the biggest message or invitation that I have in the book is that when you're about to lose someone you love, or you have lost someone you love, or you yourself are about to die, you've received a terminal diagnosis, all of those scenarios creates a deep-seated primordial fear. And I think it's important that we normalize it. It's okay. It's terrifying, and it's okay that it's terrifying. And there is a part of you that has the strength to face it. There is a part of you that has the courage to face it. And that part of you knows that you do not end when the body dies. And it's a very important message. And that I know it's maybe at odds with Western medicine, but I would say there is a mind that continues on after the body dies. And and the ground of that mind is an awareness that is absolutely untouched by anything that happens in life or the hereafter. It is this primordial substrate, ground of being, if you will, is pure awareness. And the crux of it is we that awareness of our true nature gets covered up by our stories. This happened to me and that, and this person said this to me, and I'm never going to forgive them. And the stories that we have about who we are and what's happened in life. And when we face death, all of those stories, if in that mountain of stories, if there are things that have not been healed, then death is terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And so, what death is it's an invitation. It's an invitation to lighten your heart, to heal those grievances that you maybe haven't been willing to do. Forgive the people who you haven't been willing to forgive. And there's actually a really beautiful, most people know this. If you go back to the ancient Egyptians, they talk about when you die, in their mythology, you after death you approach a great scale, and on one end is your heart, and on the other end is a feather. And I always really enjoyed that because essentially what it's asking you to do is it's asking, is your heart as light as a feather? And it doesn't take a rocket scientist. Just in this moment right now, if you're listening to me and Karina talk, ask yourself, is your heart as light as a feather? And if it isn't, which to be honest, most of us, it isn't, then ask yourself, what's the heaviness there? And the first thing that pops into your mind, that's the person or that's the situation that needs to be forgiven and needs to be released. And maybe you and I could talk about forgiveness a little bit, but that's the invitation, is death is asking you to heal what needs to be healed.
Such profound words, Adam. And yes, obviously forgiveness, well, maybe not obviously, obviously to us, forgiveness is the crux of the teaching of A Course in Miracles, which we're both students of, and we will touch on that in a moment. I would just like to, so you've spoken about your spiritual education, and then your profession as an attending physician at the bedside of 500 people as they're passing. So, and you write in your book about a handful of these experiences, and they're so profound. And these bonds of life continuing, like life and love just continues, as you say so beautifully. I wonder if you could share, like, I'd like to hear these stories. And let's begin perhaps with the first story that challenged the idea that the body ends, that life ends when the body ends. Like, what is the first moment in your career as a physician that taught you that, hang on, there's more, although you might have already intellectually known this?
Mm. I can't recall the very, very first death. I have a vague memory of it, but one of the first few deaths that I experienced was a gentleman who had, I forget what kind of cancer he had. I want to say it was lung cancer because I remember he was a smoker. But the funny thing is, it was so challenging. He had stage 4 lung cancer. I remember specifically that it had spread all throughout his body. It was absolutely, it was widely spread, and he had a matter of days. He had fluid accumulating around his heart. His heart was already having irregular rhythms. And when I spoke to him, um, when he was still lucid, and I asked him, whether he wanted to be resuscitated or not, he said no. He felt like it was his time. It was very clear. But I recall interacting with his wife and his daughter, and there was such animosity. They were quite aggressive with the nursing staff and with me and some of the other doctors and nurses. They didn't want to hear anyone saying anything negative. They only wanted positive energy in the room, which to them meant don't talk about how sick he is. Don't say the word cancer. And don't come into the room if you don't have anything good to say. These are some of the things that they told us. Now, I think there is a role, obviously, for positivity, but you cross the line into frank denial if you are unwilling to face the, the reality of what's happening. It was very, very challenging to even tell them the results of the CT scan because they would preempt us and say, if it's anything negative, I don't want to hear it. What do you do? How do you share this? Fortunately, the patient was with it enough initially for us to tell him how sick he was, but he was so tired and exhausted that when I told him, we're having difficulty sharing what's happening with your wife, he didn't say anything, but he just rolled his eyes. So he knew what we were going through. But eventually, his heart slowed down. And I remember I was on a night shift, and I was in the call room, just resting, and I started to have thoughts about him. So I got up, checked in on him, and he was doing fine, but his heart rate was a little bit low. I went back and I thought about him, and I said a little prayer for him. And I've since started to do this quite often. I just said a little prayer. I was like, if he goes tonight, I I wish him well. And prayer, by the way, doesn't need to be religious. For me, universal prayer is simply wishing well for another human being. That's it. That's all it is. It's not doesn't even need to be religious. So I was wishing well for him, and it's so funny. I'm not. I don't consider myself a psychic. I don't consider myself any. I'm not trained in those modalities or anything like that. But when I was sitting in the call room thinking about him and wishing him well, I started to have all of these images of him. I kind of, it started off as wondering, I wonder what kind of person he was in his life. And I just had that question in my mind. And sort of unbidden, I started to get all these images of a young boy playing out in the yard, tripping and hurting his knee, then a teenager and falling in love, riding a car, getting into a car crash. As all these images were sort of coming into my mind, getting married and get working, getting older, and then being in the hospital. And I thought, where did that come from? It's very interesting. It's almost like I was experiencing his life review in a way. And the wildest thing is, even after all of that, me not knowing what it represented, I just wished him well, and I said, God bless you. Whatever happens, you are loved, you are free. I remember having that thought when the nurse called me, and the nurse said he just flatlined. And I went over to his room, and sure enough, he was dead. He was dead, and I pronounced him. But it shook me because I was just in the call room having this really strange experience of having all these images of someone else that I've never known. Yes, I totally granted that it was all my imagination. I'm open to that possibility, but I don't regularly have these images pop into my mind. I don't imagine someone's life on a regular basis. These images just sort of came to me. But I found it so fascinating, and since then, I have heard about something called a shared death experience. I did not know what that was until relatively recently, but I go back to that and I think, oh, I think because of my connection with him, I was seeing what he was seeing. Perhaps. I don't know. I don't there's a lot that I don't know, but I found the whole experience very fascinating, and it also made me feel like I was connected to him on some level. So after I pronounced him dead for the hospital staff and called his tearful wife and told her the bad news, I went back into the call room and I prayed for him some more. And I told him that you really are loved and cared for, and you're free, absolutely free. And I made a point to sort of emotionally feel that freedom so that he could feel it as well. I don't know if it did anything, but I sometimes feel like on the other side, emotions really are felt and conveyed, and thoughts are felt and conveyed in a way that gets filtered, I think, when we're in the body. So I did that for him, and it felt good. It felt good.
What a powerful story. And as you were sharing it, I was going to suggest, oh, this sounds like a shared death experience. And I've done some interviews that are specifically about the shared death experience, and hopefully I'll do more. It is an absolutely fascinating space to explore. And, you know, you were talking about the prayer and prayer being a universal, you know, as simple as an intention of love, a loving thought. And it feels like that connection that you have with your patient, perhaps enhanced by this loving thought, worked as a portal to you being able to experience his final moments. Because love, I've found in so many interviews, is often the bridge to connection. And even though you say, Adam, that you're not a psychic or a medium, and I accept that, because honestly, what are the labels anyway? It sounds like you are able to connect with the spiritual dimension of your patients. And there are stories like this in your book, and there are some really powerful ones where I believe there was a young man and you saw him. And more than once, you've actually seen the spirit
Yeah.
of a patient who's just passed. So I'd love you to share one or two of those stories, because I think they'll be very, very comforting to audience members who have lost someone and feel that deep sense of abandonment almost that can
Oh,
arise upon the death of someone we love.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, let's see. Which one should I share? Well, I'll share Claire's story, which I think is sort of encapsulates that. This was. Are we good on time, by the way?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
going great. Perfect.
Okay. S- So Claire had this rare disease where basically she had uh, pretty severe kyphosis. Her spine, if you imagine this is a side view of the patient's spine, this is her head and this is her body. Her spine was bent forward like that so far that her face was looking at her body. It was nearly doubled over. And because of that, her chest was caved in. So, because her chest was caved in, her lungs were compressed and they would often get infected. So, she came in, she was young, she was in her 20s, and she came in and she had a pneumonia and she couldn't breathe very well. But she was I could already tell she was a very special lady, because when she came in, she was very short of breath. I remember that. She was very short of breath. She was on her side like this, sort of bent over, and I asked her, "Are you doing okay?" And she said yes, and she smiled, and she had like this radiant smile. She's just genuinely happy, and it just struck me like you're obviously struggling to breathe. You're having a bad day, you know. You have this pneumonia, and you're taking the time to smile for me. That really touched my heart. It really did, because I generally people handle stress differently and people handle sickness differently. And I've most of the time people are upset, angry, tearful. Most of the time they don't smile. And so here was this young lady who was smiling at me and clearly appreciative. I asked her various questions, yes or no answers, so that to minimize her talking, and we got to the bottom of what was happening. We started her on antibiotics, and in the coming days, she seemed like she was making improvement and turning around. Um, and then one day, probably 4 or 5 days into her hospital stay, she was in the ICU. I was outside of the ICU somewhere else in the hospital, and I hear the alarm for code blue in bed, which whatever. And I didn't put the two together. I just thought, oh gosh, someone in the ICU has coded, which is to say their heart stopped. Code blue means, your heart has stopped. So I run over, not knowing yet which of my patients um, was having trouble, only to find out that it was Claire. And my first thought was, oh no, what did I do wrong? That was my first thought. Like, what did I do wrong? Because it's hard as a physician, and as a nurse too, as a healthcare provider, you take such ownership of your patients that when they don't do well, there's a even though Sometimes there's illness takes the course that it naturally would have taken. There's a part of you, part of me that feels like I could have done something different. But anyway, I got to the foot of the bed, which is kind of where the physician is supposed to be when they run the code, and we assigned roles, and the nurses were pushing medications, and the respiratory therapists and some of the other providers, they had their hand underneath because her chest was like this. So normally we do chest compressions like standing up and over the patient, but we couldn't with her. So we were doing one-handed compressions like this um, on this frail body and trying to keep her alive. We briefly got her heart rate back. I could see it on the monitor. For a split second, we got it back, and I remember thinking, "Oh gosh, I hope this is it. I hope we can get her back." And I could see, it's so interesting now. I could see her eyes, not physically, but in my mind's eye, I could see her eyes looking at me. It was a very interesting experience. Her body was down and her face was covered because it was curled over, but I saw her eyes, and she has these very characteristic eyes and a very characteristic smile. And I could see these eyes, and I just felt love coming from her. And something about that helped me to drop the doubt that I had missed something, but rather this was her journey. This was her path, and that she would likely go. And there wasn't anything I could have done to affect it because this was when she was supposed to go. That was the feeling I got. I'm not saying this to take myself off the hook, but it's just sort of this feeling like everything is going to be okay. And shortly after feeling that, we lost her again, and her heart stopped. And something happened. Um, we continued to do chest compressions after we saw that her heart had stopped. But in my mind, it's almost like, and this is very hard to describe, I don't have the words for it, but in my mind, it's like her body became transparent and started to fade away. And I could see through her body, and it felt like that this woman, Claire, was this vast expanse of light, like this brilliant ball of light that actually had no edges, and it just kept going and going and going. And I could feel like that, the intuition behind that image that was in my mind was that's who Claire is. That's who she really is. She's this endless light. And with it came a feeling of that's who I am. I'm this light that expands. It was this very deep sense of connection with Claire, and I felt like I'm witnessing through with my mind's eye. I'm witnessing at who we both are. And by that point, it had been 45, 50 minutes, and we decided to call it. I declared her dead at whatever time it was, and I asked for a moment of silence, and we were all quiet. And there's a striking there's something very strange that happens when it's so loud and the alarms are blaring and everyone's yelling at each other to give medications and do this, and all of a sudden you decide that you're calling it, they're dead, and we ask for a moment of silence. The silence that comes after that kind of intensity is so palpable. It's deep, and I feel like a lot happens in that moment. And I wished her well. I sent her love, and I sent her a sense of freedom and gratitude. After we started cleaning up, I went to tell her mother that her daughter passed away. It was a very difficult conversation, but her mom knew her daughter wouldn't make it very far because of the conditions she had, so she wasn't surprised, but she was very tearful and very grateful. And her mother was a total saint, a total saint. And I'm grateful for the way that she responded to me telling her daughter died. By the way, that's one of the hardest things to do as a critical care doctor. I don't know if any one of your listeners have experienced it, but telling someone else that their loved one has died, such a hard thing to do. Oh, I've done it so many times, and it's still so hard to do. But after that conversation, I went to the hallway and I was walking to my office so that I could pray for Claire and so that I could visualize her free and sort of do my thing, which I do after my patients die. And I felt like I got this sense that someone else was in the hall, and I thought maybe it was one of the nurses coming behind me to tell me something. And I turn around and I see this shimmering outline of a really tall woman, like above me. I'm about 5'11", and this is like 6'5" or something, like very tall, long, long hair, translucent, transparent, but the eyes and the smile, it was Claire. It was absolutely Claire. It's unmistakable. And she didn't say anything, but it was very clear. She was in front of me. There's something in front of me, and tall, like regal almost. But the thought that popped into my head that felt like it was coming from her was very clearly was, thank you for seeing me as I really am. And that was powerful. And a moment after that, she disappeared. And the lesson I learned from that moment on was, don't mistake the body for who someone really is. And to extrapolate even further, don't mistake their behavior for who they really are. Don't mistake what they say for who they really are. People do and say things that they may not really mean because they don't know any better. People are always doing the best they can with what they know. And this was one of my first lessons, and I thank Claire for teaching me that. She's a great teacher, teaching me to see through appearances to the true nature of things. That was my biggest lesson early on in my career.
Oh, wow, Adam, what a powerful story. I had goosebumps as you described seeing her in the hallway. Absolutely astounding. And as you were sharing about Claire in your first meeting with her and her radiant smile, I thought here is a great teacher. And she's taken on this incarnation for this
I
profound
felt the
lesson.
same way.
Did you? Yeah. What a gift.
Yeah,
Like she's extraordinary. And then like perhaps she's well kind of a spirit guide now, and she's
yeah,
really, if there is some sort of hierarchical expression of, guides and angels, well, she's up there clearly, as evidenced by the height that you saw.
yeah.
And
Oh, I didn't. It's funny. I've never really thought about that. But in many ways, the things that we see and experience are highly symbolic. And I think you're right. I think a part of my mind had a sense that there was something special about her light.
her light. And the other thing that struck me as you were sharing the story of seeing and witnessing that boundless light is a quote from A Course in Miracles, which says, "Nothing is there but shines and shines forever." And that's the quote that came into my mind as you're sharing. So let's mention A Course in Miracles. It's played a huge part in your life, and of that fundamental teaching that it embodies, that there must be another way. And
Hmm.
I feel like many of us who study the Course have been on this journey since childhood of thinking, hang on, there's got to be another way. And then the Course meets us at some point on the journey. But feel free to share a little bit about the Course and how it came into your life and when, and what what it's shown you and what it's taught you. That's a big question. So see how you go with that, Adam.
Well, I should preface this by saying um, the core message of the book is not to wait till death knocks on your door to heal what needs to be healed and to forgive what needs to be forgiven. And you don't need to be a student of A Course in Miracles or any religion for that matter, or any path, spiritual path, to do that work. I think it's a fundamental calling as a human being to heal oneself and to love where maybe there was resentment and pain. But essentially, the A Course in Miracles is a spiritual text that came from two scribes, Helen Schuckman and Bill Thetford, and it started off with them fighting over something in Columbia, in New York, and Bill Thetford made this impassioned plea to Helen. because they were both psychologists. He says, there's got to be another way. There's got to be. And Helen usually argued with Bill. But in this case, she said, you know what? Yes, you're right, Bill, and I'm going to help you find it. And she was committed to it. Like she joined him. She met him right there. And I feel like there's a moment in each of our lives where everything is falling apart. You know, the proverbial shit hits the fan, and we just can't do it anymore. It's just too much. It's too that the overwhelm comes, the sorrow, the pain, the depression, the anxiety, like something gives. And then you have to ask yourself, isn't there another way? Isn't there another way? So for me, that kept happening in life. And that question of there's got to be another way led me to A Course in Miracles. And I'm grateful actually for Gary Renard. He has a book called The Disappearance of the Universe that while I had been exposed to A Course in Miracles, there's something about Gary's book that sort of removed the barrier of the Shakespearean verse. He sort of simplified it for me. And after reading his book, I went back to A Course, and everything was crystal clear, absolutely clear about what it meant and what its teaching was. And fundamentally, one of the most important aspects of A Course in Miracles, which I interpret as a non-dual teaching, what that means is God or source or primordial reality, whatever term you want to use, is the only reality. And everything else that appears to be form is an illusion. And it's not, when you say it that way, it sort of seems like you're dismissing the world, but rather we are operating under the false assumption that we are these bodies separate from each other. That's the illusion that the Course is talking about. We aren't. The pain and fear that arises with death happens because we're identifying with something that is not eternal, something that is very much finite and will end. What the job is, or the invitation is to shift the identity from the finite to the infinite, and to recognize that you have never been separate from God. You have never been separate from Source. And I know this is going into very much spiritual waters, but you asked for it. And, A Course in Miracles, with that background of all there is God, and you've never been separate from Source. You've never been separate. You think you are, but you never have been. It's sort of like the prodigal son. He thinks he was kicked out from his father's house. And when he decides he needs to come back because he reaches that point of there's got to be another way, he feels like he won't be accepted by his father. But the truth is his father has always loved him. Always, always. And he was always welcome back home. In that sense, that's what the Course is saying. We've always been welcome back home and always loved. And probably more accurately, we've never left home. That's the key point. We think we have, but we never have been separate. We've always been one all along. Now, the journey to get there involves this healing work that we're talking about. And the Course uses the word forgiveness. And if it's okay with you, I'd love to spend just a moment to describe what is meant by forgiveness.
Please do. It's such a loaded term and it does trigger people. And I would love you to do that. Please go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I know because I've gotten some backlash around talking about forgiveness, and so I have a sensitivity to how to talk about it. This is what forgiveness is not. Let's say, Karina, you say something that's very rude and mean to me. And then I say, well, I'm going to forgive you, Karina, because I'm the better person. I absolutely think what you did is wrong, and I will never forget. But I'm going to let you off the hook. I'm going to forget. I'm going to forgive, but I won't forget. And what that does is it's sort of like a false charity. It's like you're sort of giving something away because you feel like you're a better person genuinely, and they're less than you. And your mind is saying they did something wrong and they don't deserve love. Now, that's not the forgiveness that we're talking about. The forgiveness that we're talking about is a forgiveness that's able to see past the behavior. And so maybe I'll say, okay, Karina said what she did, but it wasn't personal. What she said was more indicative of her state of mind. Maybe it was more indicative of how she was raised, her childhood upbringing, her trauma, her unhealed guilt, right? Most of the time when people hurt us, they do so because it really isn't personal. It's because they're hurting themselves. And there's this beautiful reframing that a course offers, which is that when people attack, it's just a call for love. It's a call for love. It really, there's two forms of expression. You either express love or you call for love. But the response to both is love. You return that call for love with love. Um, Now, forgiveness is seeing through all of that and recognizing that the other person, let's say Karina, is actually innocent. At the core of her being, there's that little girl, that innocent little girl that really hasn't done anything wrong and deserves love always. And so forgiveness then, first and foremost, has nothing to do with outward behavior, in my opinion. You're not actually saying to someone, "Oh, I love you," and what you did is okay. Forgiveness does not condone bad behavior or irresponsible behavior. It's a shift in your own mindset about whether that person deserves to be loved and whether they are innocent. If you can see through the illusion of that attack to the core of the innocence of the person, you free yourself from the burden of judgment. And anyone who's sat long enough in the prison of anger and resentment knows that it very much is a prison. It it is suffocating. And that prison of judgment and blame and anger is created by you. You're the only one making it. So when you forgive someone, you don't have to say a word to them. You may choose to never talk to them again, and that's totally fine, especially in abusive relationships, domestic violence. Forgiveness does not mean you condone that. And love could mean you walk away from the situation and you never talk to them again, or you file a restraining order. That's a form of love, you know? But what it does mean is in your mind, you cut through the behavior and you recognize there is innocence there at the core of that being, and that person is wholly deserving of love. And this is the last point I'm going to make because it's such an important one. There's a part of our mind that remembers oneness. There's a part of our mind, subconscious, unconscious, it's deep. It knows there's only one of us here. So when you tell someone that you don't deserve love, that part of your mind internalizes it to be about yourself. And you're telling yourself, I don't deserve to be loved. And it creates a tremendous amount of pain that you don't even know you're doing. But you can reverse it. And if you look through the attack of someone else and you can say, you are innocent. You're pure spirit. You're wholly deserving of love. You're telling yourself the same thing about yourself. You're saying, I am innocent and I'm wholly deserving of love. And I can tell you from firsthand, the more I do that to others, I feel lighter and lighter and lighter. And I do start to feel like my heart is getting almost as close to the lightness of a feather. I don't think I'm quite there yet, but I feel like I've gotten pretty far by doing this work.
Oh, thank you, Adam. That honestly was such a wonderful explanation of some very complex yet simple, because it's paradoxical, concepts that are in A Course in Miracles. And as you're talking, a couple of things came up for me. One is the Claire showing you, thank you for seeing the truth of me. So there is this truth that is beyond, that forgiveness helps us to see this, even if we don't have the magnificent experience of seeing the light as you did. It invites us to the perception that there's more. And then there's a quote of yours. Now let me find it in your book. you talked about, um, oh, here. So, what allows some people to face death peacefully while others are terrified? In my experience, the former have chosen peaceful, loving thoughts for most of their lives. So, if we can forgive, that helps us to retain this space of peaceful, loving state, which will then ensure that not only do we live well, but we also die well. Yeah, and to
That's
tie it back
beautiful.
with a bow to your work at the bedside of 500 people. So it's really important to do this work of quote unquote forgiveness so that we can have these healed thoughts and live and pass away better. And
Yeah.
as the Course shows us, and as you've witnessed, what we call death is merely an extension of life, but in a different form.
Yeah. I've had so many patients, very productive, very successful patients who've made lots of money, who have started huge businesses that are very well known. And when it comes to their death and they're telling me what really mattered in their life, not one of them has mentioned the money they made, the success of their business, the so-called successes of the world. I have not once heard from a patient that that is what mattered to them. Instead, what they tell me is, "I'm so glad I got a chance to be with my kids. I'm glad I got to have spend dinners with my wife." Or sometimes the reverse. My wife died years ago, and I just wish I had spent more time with her when I was working. Those are the kind of regrets. It's never about the so-called successes. And it sort of dawned on me. I mean, I still think I'm relatively young, but it's dawned on me that this hustle culture that we have in the world, of trying to make money and make a name for ourselves, none of it means anything when you're on your deathbed. But what does matter is, have I loved fully and completely? And not only others, but myself too. Have I forgiven myself for the things for the mistakes that I think I've made? That to me is way, way more important than any other success you've achieved. And it's partly what drove me to write this book.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned love here because I'd like to touch on something that you write in your book about love, and you call it a truth or the truth that would answer all questions and heal all wounds. So I wondered about how your relationship with love has changed since studying the course or since the experiences that you've had, and how you put that understanding of love into practice in your personal and professional life.
Well, I like to be practical. One of the things that I had trouble with early on is I was studying spiritual traditions. I read many, many spiritual texts from many traditions, but it was intellectual. And I resolved early on, this was even before medical school, I resolved to stop the intellectualizing of the spiritual path, but to absolutely put it to practice every single day. And what I found was that the work of healing the inner hurts and the pain that we go through, you can feel the healing being done. It it's like this felt sense, and I'll describe it for myself. But everyone's different. But for me, let's say something bad happened during the day, maybe a mistake that I made, or something that I said that I shouldn't have, or something that someone else did or said that hurt me. When I think about it at the end of the day, it feels like my chest is tight. It feels like this. It feels like I can't breathe deeply. There's a sort of a heaviness, like it pulls me down. I have made a practice that I invite others to do before bed. I always take a moment, I close my eyes, and I just review the whole day. And just the sweep of the day, and I'll find the moments that have this energy of tightness. And it's almost like, if you've gotten a really good massage, the masseuse will be working through your muscles, and all of a sudden they'll feel a knot, and they're like, "Oh, okay, there's something here." And then they like zoom into it, and then maybe they get their elbow in, and then you're crying and because it's so painful. But that's kind of what I do, but for my inner world. I sweep the day and I find those moments of tightness, and I could feel it in my heart because my heart does this. And I just look at it and I welcome it. I stop the resistance. I drop the resistance and I say, yes, this hurts. This really hurts, and I wish this hadn't happened today. But I hold it with love and care, and I give it space to breathe and be, and something happens in the allowing of the emotion just to be with no resistance. It's sort of like the walls start to soften and drop away. And then I go to the core of it and I do this forgiveness work, and I remind myself, I did the best that I could with what I knew in that moment. In truth, I am innocent. In truth, I'm worthy of love, deserving of love. And I see myself dissolving and just remembering, if you will, this endless light that is the true nature of each of us. We could call it God, but you don't even need a name for it. It's just this vast expanse of love and light. And I connect with it and I remind myself that's who I am. And then if it's something that someone else did to me, I do the same thing, but for them. I imagine them as I tell myself that they're innocent, they're wholly deserving of love, they're pure spirit. And I watch their body fade and dissolve, and I remind myself that light that is the core nature of reality, that's me and that's them, and we're one. Every time I do this without fail, the tightness that was there, viscerally, I feel it. It opens up. I breathe deeper. My muscles loosen. My whole body relaxes. There's a lightness of being. To me, that's the practical application. When that happens, I know I've healed. I've healed that tension because the tension isn't there anymore. And I know I've done the work. I do that before I go to bed. I do my best to go to bed without any tension because I know that every day I'm healing the things that arose as they arose. Eventually, it happens where I'm not just doing it at night, but I'm doing that as the tension happens when it arises in the moment. But oftentimes I'm busy and I forget, and I just do that sort of sweep of the day at the end. So hopefully that's just a personal tool that I
Thank
offer
you.
to your listeners.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I was going to ask you about a practice, and there are practices that you offer in your book as well. So I love that. Thank you, because that is definitely where the rubber hits the road, like when a grievance is arising, what do you do in that moment? And it is so easy to forget every spiritual teaching you've ever learned and bite back. It's the easiest thing. But I think having that backup of your nightly practice helps you to address that. I love that. Thank you. Well, Adam, I could talk to you for hours on end and I'd get nothing else
Same.
done. So I'm going to have to bring us to the end of our conversation. But a couple of questions before we go. Firstly, where can our listeners find out more about you, and where can they buy your beautiful book?
Thank you for asking, Karina. First of all, it's been such a joy. I haven't you asked questions I haven't yet been able to talk about, and I'm very grateful. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm still learning how to be an author and how to do authory things. I don't I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing until someone tells me I should be doing it. But I have a website up for the book. It's called lovedoesnotknowdeath.com. You can buy the book from there, and you can also sign up for my newsletter. Um, the place that I am most active is on Substack. My Substack is called Adventures in Kindness, and the URL is adamrizvi.substack.com. And you could go there, and roughly twice a month I will write essays on the various lessons that I learned from my patients in the hospital, and just ways that I apply my spiritual practice to what I do on a day-to-day basis. I'm just about to write several articles. For those of you who are students of A Course in Miracles, I'm doing some deep dive essays comparing A Course in Miracles concepts to some other wisdom traditions, and I'm going to be publishing those on Medium. So look out for those on the Medium platform.
Beautiful. I'm also on Substack, although not as prolifically as I would like to be, but it's a great platform. I will look for you there and I will follow you there, Adam, and I'll also link to everything that you've mentioned here so that it's easy for our audience to find you. So I wonder, as we close, two last questions. Is there anything you'd like to say directly to anyone who's listening who's missing a loved one, or who perhaps is experiencing the sickness of a loved one at the moment and the imminent passing, that they're facing this right now?
Yeah. Um, First, I would say is um, these moments are very painful, and it's okay. It's okay to cry. It's okay to grieve. You don't, especially for those who are quote unquote on the spiritual path, you don't need to be spiritual. Just be normal. Be a human being. You can cry. You can let it all out. That's normal. So be there. Healing will happen with time. Remember that your loved one, that communication goes on. It doesn't matter whether their body has died. Communication continues. Love continues. That's the real thing that never ends. I've had plenty of experiences of ongoing communication with my father. So trust that. Trust that the communication continues. And the last message I have is for everyone, which is don't wait. Don't wait for death. Whatever needs to be said, whatever needs to be healed, don't wait. Just do it. Do it now. Do it today. It doesn't need any more time. You can do it right now.
Beautiful. Thank you, Adam. And the final question I have for you today is one that I put to all of my guests on the Spirit Sisters podcast, and it is, what can an encounter with spirit teach us about living feet on the ground on earth?
An encounter with spirit, I think, can teach us how to be more fully human. And to me, the most human we can get is a kind human. Kindness to me is the epitome, the expression of someone who is living the spiritual path, who is living the path of love. Kindness is a natural expression of that. And I think an encounter with spirit makes us more kind.
Beautiful. What a divine note to end on. I'm so honoured to have welcomed you onto the show today, Adam. One of my favourite conversations. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Karina.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Sisters. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe so that you won't miss an episode. And don't forget to rate and review the show. Have an experience you'd like to share with me? Get in touch at my website, karinamachado.com, or find me on Facebook at Karina Machado Author. After all, there's nothing more powerful than a story.